It's not the kind of a show that could be done today because there are too many sensitivities that would be involved, and you would wind up in a legal morass like...
Laugh-In.
There are television moments that become famous because everyone loved them. And then there are moments that become famous because someone desperately wanted them gone. In 1969, one new comedy show lasted barely long enough for viewers to understand what they were watching. Then suddenly it disappeared. A test pattern appeared. The screen went black. Organ music began playing. And somewhere inside a television station, a man picked up the phone and started calling other stations, warning them not to air the program. What could possibly have been shown on American television that caused a station manager to pull the plug almost immediately? The strange part is that this wasn't some unknown production made by inexperienced people. The men behind it had already created one of the biggest television hits in America. Their earlier show had become a national phenomenon. Millions of people watched it every week. And now, just 1 year later, those same producers had created something so controversial that an entire network practically wanted to pretend it had never existed. But to understand why this happened, you have to go back to the show that started everything. The show nobody thought would work. When Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In first appeared on television in 1968, NBC wasn't exactly confident about it. The network needed something to fill a time slot. That was basically how the show got its chance. It wasn't treated like the next great television revolution. Executives weren't looking at it and thinking, this is going to change everything. If anything, they were confused by it. The show moved incredibly fast. Sketches could last only seconds. One joke would appear, then another, then another. The camera might suddenly cut to a performer. A punchline would hit before viewers had time to settle into the previous joke. Then the whole thing would move somewhere else. To traditional television executives, it looked almost chaotic. But that chaos was exactly what audiences loved. Within weeks, something unexpected happened. Laugh-In exploded. The program eventually became the #1 show on television. At its height, roughly 50 million viewers were tuning in regularly. That meant close to 1/3 of American television households were watching. And the timing couldn't have been more important. America was going through an incredibly tense period. Vietnam had divided the country. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. Robert Kennedy had been assassinated. Riots had erupted. Political arguments were everywhere. People were angry. People were frightened. And then, every week, Laugh-In arrived with bright colors, strange characters, fast jokes, dancing, music, and comedy that seemed to come from every direction at once. It didn't give the audience enough time to sit with one joke before the next one arrived. That speed became its greatest weapon. But it also created a problem. Because the faster the show became, the harder it was for NBC to control. And NBC had people whose entire job was to control exactly that. The men watching every joke. Television censorship in the late 1960s was nothing like what audiences are used to today. Networks had standards departments. They reviewed scripts. They looked for material involving sex, race, politics, and anything else that could cause complaints from viewers or local stations. And Laugh-In created a nightmare for them. The show produced an enormous amount of material. There were jokes everywhere. Some were obvious. Some were hidden inside wordplay. Some only became controversial when an actor delivered them in a certain way. And sometimes the people reviewing the scripts didn't even realize what the audience would see until the cameras were rolling. One example involved a medical sketch. The censors objected to the use of the word breast. The writers were furious because the same word had apparently appeared on another educational program that aired on the same network. But the difference was simple. On one show, it was information. On Laugh-In, everything could become a joke. And that made the network nervous. The writers soon realized something important. They didn't always have to defeat the censors. Sometimes they only had to distract them. George Schlatter and his writers developed a clever strategy. They would put material into the script that they knew the standards department would hate. Some of these jokes were practically bait. They were loud. They were provocative. They were easy for a censor to circle and demand that they be removed. And while the censors were busy fighting over those jokes, other material could slip through. The writers understood that the people reviewing the scripts had limited time, so they gave them too many things to fight about. It became a strange game. The network thought it was controlling the show. The writers knew they were controlling the attention of the people doing the controlling. And because Laugh-In moved so quickly, there was another advantage. By the time the network objected to something, the production process could already be several steps ahead. The show was being written, filmed, edited, changed, and prepared for broadcast almost constantly. The censors were trying to catch a moving target. For a while, they couldn't. That allowed Laugh-In to get away with things that seemed impossible for network television. The show could joke about sex, could joke about politics, could joke about race, could mock authority, and sometimes it could even make fun of NBC itself. That last part is important, because Laugh-In wasn't simply fighting censorship behind closed doors. It was turning censorship into part of the entertainment. The joke hidden in plain sight. One of the show's famous phrases was, "Beautiful downtown Burbank." On the surface, it sounded like cheerful promotion, but everyone understood the joke. NBC studios were located in Burbank, and Burbank wasn't exactly the glamorous center of Hollywood that the phrase made it sound like. Every time the show repeated the phrase, it was quietly reminding viewers that the television network was sitting just outside the camera frame. The show also played games with words. A phrase like "funk and wagnalls" sounded suspicious enough to make people laugh, while still being perfectly innocent on paper. There was even a segment called "Salute to Censorship." Think about that. A television program was openly making fun of the people whose job was to censor it. And the network was broadcasting the joke itself. That was the strange power of Laugh-In. The audience knew the show was pushing boundaries. The writers knew they were pushing boundaries. The network knew they were pushing boundaries. But somehow the show kept getting away with it. Then something happened that proved just how powerful the program had become. And it involved a future president. The 3 seconds that became political history. In September 1968, Richard Nixon appeared on Laugh-In. At the time, Nixon was running for president, and the producers asked him to do something that seemed completely ridiculous. They wanted him to say the show's famous phrase, "Sock it to me." It sounds harmless now, but that was exactly why the joke worked. Nixon was known as serious, stiff, and formal. Putting him inside the strange world of Laugh-In was funny simply because it didn't seem like the kind of thing he would normally do. It took several attempts to get the moment right. The producers wanted Nixon to deliver the line in a particular way. Not too serious, not too aggressive, just awkward enough. Eventually, they got the take they wanted. The entire clip lasted only a few seconds. But those few seconds became famous. Nixon won the 1968 presidential election. And later, people wondered whether his appearance on Laugh-In had helped him win. Nobody could prove that. Nobody ever could. But the possibility showed just how powerful entertainment television had become. Politicians could no longer simply ignore popular culture. They had to enter it. They had to appear human. They had to play along. And Laugh-In had helped create that new political world. But then the producers made a mistake. They took the formula that had made Laugh-In successful and pushed it much further. Much faster. Much stranger. And much harder to control. The show that went too far. The program was called Turn On. And it was supposed to be the next big experiment in television comedy. The producers were Ed Friendly and George Schlatter, the same men connected to the success of Laugh-In. That connection made the failure even more shocking. Because Turn On didn't simply push the boundaries. It seemed determined to erase them. The format was radically different. There were no comfortable permanent sets. No traditional sitcom structure. No familiar family story. Instead, the program was built around rapid-fire comedy inside a strange, almost empty visual world. The jokes came quickly. The images changed. And much of the material focused heavily on sex. But there was a critical difference between Laugh-In and Turn On. Laugh-In often hid its provocative ideas inside humor. It would hit you with a joke and immediately move on. Turn On sometimes stayed on the controversial image. It didn't always give the viewer time to laugh and escape. It made the subject itself impossible to ignore. And television audiences in 1969 were not prepared for that. At least, not in the way the producers expected. Then came the night that changed everything. The night a station pulled the plug. It was February 5, 1969. An ABC affiliate in Cleveland began airing Turn On. The show had been on for only about 10 minutes. Then something extraordinary happened. A station manager walked into the control room. He looked at the screen, and he made a decision. The feed was cut. The program disappeared. A test pattern appeared. Then the screen went dark. And instead of the comedy continuing, viewers heard organ music. Imagine watching that in your living room. 1 second you're watching a new comedy program. The next second, you're staring at a blank television screen while music plays. You don't know if the broadcast has malfunctioned. You don't know if the station is joking. You don't know whether the program will return. But the station manager knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't waiting for the episode to finish. He was trying to stop it. And he didn't stop there. He began calling other ABC affiliates. He wanted to warn them. The message was essentially simple. Don't air this. By the time the program was supposed to reach viewers on the West Coast, the damage had already begun. The show wasn't simply being criticized. It was being rejected in real time, and the numbers that followed were brutal. Within 2 days, ABC received hundreds of complaints. Support was tiny by comparison. Within days, dozens of affiliates were saying they didn't want to carry the program again. The experiment was effectively over almost before it had begun. But there was one detail that made the entire story almost impossible to believe. The station manager who helped kill the program was in Cleveland. And Cleveland had already played a strange role in the history of Laugh-In, the city that became the punchline. Years earlier, the Laugh-In writers had been told to ease up on certain ethnic jokes. They needed another target for their one-liners.